My son changed the locks on our family home the morning after my wife's funeral. He handed me a garbage bag with some of my clothes and told me the driveway was for family. I smiled, said nothing, and drove away. Because tucked inside my jacket was a letter from Margaret, and I already knew exactly what was coming next. The house felt wrong during the reception. Not empty, not sad the way a home feels after 41 years of marriage suddenly becomes 41 years of memory. Wrong because my son Daniel hadn't cried once. Not at the church, not at the graveside, not here in the living room where his mother had hosted every Christmas since 1989. He moved through the crowd accepting condolences, with his hand already in his pocket, fingers around his phone, checking something every few minutes. His wife Nicole stood near the dining room credenza, touching the edge of Margaret's good china set, like she was calculating its resale value. I stood by the window with a cup of tea that had gone cold and watched them. 32 years as a chartered accountant had trained me to see patterns where other people saw noise. Numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. People did too. The pattern I was reading now, in my own living room, on the day we buried my wife, was not a complicated one. Our neighbor from down the street squeezed my arm and said Margaret had been one of the finest women she'd ever known. I thanked her. I watched Daniel open the drawer of the sideboard where Margaret kept important papers. He glanced at the contents, closed it, moved on. By 7 o'clock, most people had gone. Daniel and Nicole stayed. They were always going to stay. Nicole found me in the kitchen rinsing cups I didn't need to rinse. "Dad," she said. And the word came with that particular warmth people use when they're about to say something cold. "We need to have a conversation. About the house. About the future." I turned off the tap. Daniel came in behind her, standing the way he always stood when he felt entitled to something, shoulders back, jaw forward. "Mom's name was on the deed. Dad, you know that. The house was hers before you were married. I've already spoken to a realtor. The market in Oakville is exceptional right now." I looked at my son. He was 40 years old and he had his mother's eyes but not her heart, and I had been pretending not to notice that for longer than I should have. "Tomorrow," I said. "We'll talk tomorrow." They exchanged a look. Nicole nodded like she was agreeing to a reasonable business arrangement. I walked through the house after they left. Checked the locks out of habit, the way Margaret always reminded me to do. Stood in the hallway outside our bedroom for a long moment before I could make myself go in. The room smelled like her. I sat on the edge of the bed still wearing my tie and opened the nightstand drawer. The envelope had been there for 2 years. Margaret had put it there herself one Sunday afternoon when the September light was coming through the curtains, and she'd held it in both hands and looked at me with those careful gray eyes. "Thomas," she'd said, "if something happens to me, this stays sealed until after the funeral, until you've seen what you need to see. Promise me." But I'd promised. I hadn't understood. Now I did. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket and lay back on the bed without undressing and didn't sleep. They came at 8 the next morning. I was still in the kitchen with my first coffee when I heard Daniel's key in the lock. He had a key, because we had given it to him years ago for emergencies. This was, apparently, an emergency. He came in carrying flat-pack boxes, the kind you buy at a moving supply store. Nicole was behind him with a roll of tape. "We thought we'd help you get organized," Nicole said. "Get ahead of things." I looked at the boxes. I looked at my son. He set them on the kitchen table. "Dad, we talked about this last night. The house was Mom's separate property. She bought it before the two of you were married. Her parents' money. That means it's part of her estate. And as her children, we inherit. You understand that, right?" "I have one child," I said. "You, right." Nicole touched his arm. "Which means it comes to us. We've already been in touch with an estate lawyer. It's very straightforward. I want you to be honest with me, Daniel." I kept my voice level. I'd spent 32 years delivering difficult financial news to clients without flinching. "This is how we're doing things? The morning after your mother's funeral?" He didn't look away. He'd gotten better at that. "Mom always said you'd make this hard. That you'd act like this house was yours. It isn't, Dad. It never was. She paid for everything. Your salary went to what, exactly? You never made real money. Not like she did. Margaret had built her practice from nothing. Naturopathic medicine, then a wellness clinic, then 3 locations across the GTA. She had made considerably more money than I had over our lifetime together, and she had never once held that over me. Not once in 41 years. I'm going to get some air, I said. We'll have things sorted by noon. I walked to my car, opened the trunk, and placed the envelope carefully under the flap of the spare tire cover. Then I drove to a Tim Hortons on Lakeshore and ordered a coffee and a bran muffin and sat at a window table and opened the envelope. A property deed slid out first. Lake Muskoka. A cottage she'd inherited from her uncle in 2019. 4-bedroom, waterfront. Assessed value on the document at $1.3 million. There were updated papers folded behind it. Current assessed value $2.1 million. She'd had it reassessed in 2023 and never mentioned it to Daniel. Then investment account statements. Registered and non-registered. TD Wealth, managed portfolio. I added the figures 3 times because I didn't trust myself the first 2 times. $4.7 million. Conservative growth, well managed, accumulated over decades from her clinic's profits. A letter. Last. Handwritten on the cream notepaper she kept in her desk. Thomas, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Daniel has shown you the version of himself I've been watching develop for the past decade. I'm sorry I didn't warn you more directly. I kept hoping I was wrong about him. I wasn't. The house on Elmwood was my mother's gift, and yes, my name is on it alone. But I made a will. Everything I have goes to you. The cottage, the investments, all of it. I kept the Muskoka property out of any conversation that included Daniel because I saw how he looked at things that had value. The way he looked at my clinic. The way Nicole talked about our neighborhood. I love my son. I do not trust him with money. I trust you with everything. There's a business card in here. Call David Fong. He handled all of this. He's been expecting your call since the day I signed my will. Be patient, Thomas. You were always the patient one. All my love. Forever. Margaret. I sat in that Tim Hortons for 45 minutes, drank my coffee, finished the muffin, watched the morning traffic on Lakeshore Boulevard. Then I found the business card. David Fong, barrister and solicitor. Estate and probate law. A Burlington address. I called from the parking lot. Mr. Henderson. His voice was measured, professional. I've been waiting for this call. Your wife prepared very thoroughly. Can you come in this afternoon? I can come right now, I said. His office was in a low building near the Burlington GO station. David Fong was maybe 55. Methodical in the way that good estate lawyers are methodical. The kind of man who checked his work twice and billed fairly. He shook my hand, offered water, and opened a file that was already thick with documents. Your wife's estate is straightforward in the legal sense, he said. Complex in the personal sense, I suspect. He spread papers across his desk. The will was executed 18 months ago. She named you sole beneficiary. The Elmwood property in Oakville, which was her separate property under Ontario law, passes to you as surviving spouse and sole inheritor under the will. The investment portfolio, the Muskoka cottage, all of it. I told him what had happened that morning. He nodded. They have no legal claim. The will is clear. Your son and his wife are occupying property that belongs to you. Unlawfully. As of this conversation. What do I do now? We file for probate with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. Estates branch. In Ontario, the process takes several months, but the will is valid. The property ownership is documented, and we have everything we need. We also initiate a formal notice to your son to vacate the Elmwood property. How long before he has to leave? Ontario requires 60 days minimum for residential eviction once formal notice is served. If he refuses, we go to court. Given the documentation, you will prevail. I looked at the Muskoka deed on his desk. I had never been to that cottage. Margaret had gone a few times, she'd told me, to have the roof repaired, to check on things. I'd never asked too many questions. I was beginning to understand why she'd kept it quiet. She was protecting you, Fong said, as if reading my expression. She was quite deliberate about all of this. I signed the representation agreement, authorized the probate filing, and drove back to Oakville. Not to the house on Elmwood, to a Hampton Inn on the QEW where I paid for a week with my visa and carried nothing inside except the envelope. The room was generic and quiet, and mine. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about 41 years. About the house we'd painted together in 1987, the kitchen renovation in 2001, Margaret's herb garden along the back fence that she'd tended every spring. About Daniel at 7 years old bringing her dandelions wrapped in a paper towel, calling them a bouquet. That boy and this man were related only by time. I called my brother in Guelph, told him everything. He was quiet for a long time after. Then he said, "What do you need?" I said, "Nothing yet. Just wanted someone to know." I ordered takeout from a Thai place down the road and ate it at the small table by the window and fell asleep before 10. The notice was served 11 days later. A process server went to Elmwood on a Tuesday morning. Daniel called me 17 minutes after. "Dad, what is this?" His voice had lost its boardroom confidence. "This is a legal notice." "Why are there lawyers involved?" "This is family. You changed the locks on my house, Daniel." "Mom's house." "My house. Under her will, which your mother executed with a lawyer 18 months ago, which names me as sole beneficiary of everything she owned." A long silence. Then Nicole in the background, urgent and low. Then Daniel again, the confidence returning, forced this time. "We're contesting this." Mom wasn't in her right mind toward the end. She was on medication. She was upset. "This will is invalid. Your mother was sharp until the day she died," I said. "You know that. We'll see what a court says. I've already filed for probate. I'll see you there." I ended the call. Sat back against the hotel headboard. Daniel didn't call again that day. Nicole called twice. I let both go to voicemail and didn't listen to them. Fong called the following week. "Your son has retained counsel," he told me. "A firm in Mississauga. They've filed a notice of objection to the will. They're arguing lack of testamentary capacity, claiming Margaret was under undue influence when she signed. Standard challenge strategy when someone has no better argument. Can they win? No." He was direct about it. The will was witnessed and notarized by 2 independent parties. I have Margaret's medical records showing no cognitive impairment. I have the signing video, which we recorded as a precaution. This objection will fail, but it will slow things down. Probably 4 to 6 months before the court dismisses it. I bought another month at the Hampton Inn. During those months, I established a routine. Morning walks along the lake. Breakfast at the same diner on Plains Road, where the waitress started leaving a pot of decaf at my table without being asked. Afternoons reading or meeting with Fong to review documents. I had spent 32 years managing other people's financial complexity. Managing my own felt in a strange way, like coming back to a skill I'd neglected. The will challenge hearing was set for a Thursday in November. I arrived at the Burlington courthouse 20 minutes early in the same charcoal suit I'd worn for Margaret's funeral because it was the only suit I'd brought when I'd packed my 3 boxes. Fong met me in the lobby. "Your son's lawyer," he said, "is named Garrison. He's competent but underfunded. Your son apparently sold some mutual funds to cover the retainer. Nicole's parents contributed. They're stretched." We walked through security, took the elevator to the 2nd floor. Family and estates court. The hallway smelled like old carpet and fluorescent light. Daniel and Nicole were already seated inside. Daniel wore a suit I didn't recognize. New, dark, gray. Nicole had her hair back. They looked like people playing at something. I'd sat across from clients for 30 years who wore the same expression, the particular tightness of people who'd made a decision they couldn't afford to back out of. I sat at the petitioner's table with Fong, did not look at my son. The Honorable Justice Miriam Adeyemi entered. The clerk called the file. Fong presented his case methodically. The will, Margaret's medical history, including a clean cognitive assessment from her GP, dated just 4 months before she signed. The video of the signing, which Justice Adeyemi watched in full, Margaret's voice clear and precise, confirming each clause with the kind of careful articulation I recognized from 40 years of watching her handle important things. Then Garrison rose to present Daniel's case. He called one witness, a former employee from Margaret's clinic, a woman named Patrice, who testified that she had observed Margaret seeming confused and distressed during appointments in the last year of her life. Fong's cross-examination took 8 minutes. He established that Patrice had been let go from the clinic in 2022 following a workplace complaint, that she had exchanged 14 messages with Daniel via Instagram in the 6 weeks before this hearing, that she had no medical training, and had offered no clinical observation, only personal impression, that she could not identify a single specific incident of confusion, only a general feeling. Justice Adeyemi was not a woman who softened her language unnecessarily. She dismissed the objection from the bench. The will, she said, was clearly and properly executed. The evidence of testamentary capacity was extensive. The objection had no merit and appeared to be a delay tactic rather than a genuine legal challenge. She validated the will, confirmed my ownership of the Elmwood property, and ordered that Daniel and Nicole vacate within 60 days. Daniel stood up when she finished. Your Honor, we sold our condo in Etobicoke to cover my mother's hospice costs. We have nowhere to go. We need more time. Justice Adeyemi looked at him over her glasses. That was a financial decision you made voluntarily, Mr. Henderson. The court is not in a position to adjust property law to accommodate it. 60 days. In the hallway, Daniel found me before I reached the elevator. This isn't over. His voice was low, careful. I have a right to something. She was my mother. I stopped, turned to face him. She left you everything she decided to leave you. I said. And she decided. You don't get to contest her judgment because you disagree with it. She was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was the clearest thinker I've ever known, I said. And she thought clearly about you for a long time. His jaw tightened. Nicole put her hand on his arm. I pressed the elevator button and waited for it without speaking. The doors opened. Fong and I stepped in. I watched my son's face as the doors closed. He looked, for just a moment, like a boy who'd broken something he couldn't fix. Then the doors met, and he was gone. I was back at the hotel by noon, ate a sandwich, watched the November light move across the parking lot, called my brother, and told him the update. He said, "Well done, Tom. Take care of yourself." He tried. The 60 days ran out on a January morning so cold the windshield on my rental fogged up before I reached the end of the parking lot. Fong had arranged for a bailiff and a locksmith to accompany me to the property. Standard procedure for a contested eviction, even when the occupants had agreed to leave. They had agreed to leave. Fong had confirmed it the evening before. Daniel called his office at 4:30 and said they'd be out by noon. I arrived at 2 o'clock, gave them the extra time without being asked. The bailiff tried to argue with me about the timing. I thanked him and told him I was sure. The house was empty, not stripped, not vandalized. The furniture was still there. My furniture. Margaret's furniture. 41 years of accumulated living. Their things were gone. A few nail holes in the walls where they'd hung their own pictures. That was all. The bailiff walked through room by room. The locksmith changed the locks. I stood in the kitchen where I had stood on the morning Daniel arrived with his flat-pack boxes and looked at the counter where Margaret had made tea every morning for 40 years and felt the particular weight of a thing that is both a victory and a loss simultaneously. I called the realtor that evening. Not the one Daniel had spoken to. A different one, a woman named Priya who came recommended by a colleague from my accounting days, who understood that this was not a joyful sale but a necessary one. She walked through the house on a Saturday, made notes, spoke carefully. The Oakville market is still very strong, she said. This property, in this condition with this lot size, I think we list at 1.4 and expect over asking. We listed at 1.42 in February. 23 showings in the first week. 2 offers on offer night, both over asking. We accepted 1.57. All cash. Quick. Close. I signed the papers at a lawyer's office in downtown Oakville on a Tuesday afternoon and walked out with a check that still didn't feel real. During those months, Fong kept me updated on Daniel and Nicole. The Etobicoke condo had indeed been sold. They were renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Brampton on a month-to-month lease. Daniel had been working in commercial real estate, mid-level, the kind of position that required a RICO license and paid on commission. His license had been flagged by the Real Estate Council of Ontario following a complaint related to some documents he'd filed during the will challenge, documents that Fong's investigator had quietly brought to their attention. The complaint was under review. Nicole had gone back to work full-time, something in HR at a logistics company. Daniel's commissions had dropped significantly. They were, by all available evidence, managing but only just. I should have felt satisfied. I'd expected to feel satisfied. Instead, I felt tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. In March, an email arrived. Daniel's address. I sat with it in my inbox for 2 days before I opened it. Dad, I've started this email 14 times. I don't have a version of this where I sound like a good person, so I'll just be honest. I was wrong. I knew before I started that Mom's will was real, and that she'd thought it through, and that I had no actual legal claim to anything. I did it anyway because Nicole and I had convinced ourselves that we deserved something and that you had somehow gotten in the way of what we deserved. That thinking was wrong, and I can't make it right. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say that out loud to you in writing so there's no ambiguity about whether I understand what I did. I understand what I did. I'm sorry, Dad. I read it 4 times. Then I closed the laptop and went for a long walk along the Bronte Creek Trail, where Margaret and I used to walk on Sunday mornings when the weather was good. It was cold but clear, and the creek was partially frozen, and I walked for an hour and a half without talking to anyone. I did not respond to the email that night. In April, I drove to Muskoka for the first time. The cottage was at the end of a gravel road that wound through birch trees down to the water. I had the key from Fong's office and the gate code from Margaret's letter. The gate opened and I drove the last quarter-kilometer slowly, watching the lake appear between the trees. It was not a cottage the way most people meant cottage. It was a 4-bedroom cedar and glass house on 2 acres of waterfront. Margaret's uncle had built it in the 90s. She had inherited it quietly and maintained it just as quietly, paying a local property management company to keep it in order year-round. I unlocked the front door and stood inside. The main room had a stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake. Muskoka chairs on the dock, still wrapped in winter covers. A canoe in the boathouse that I discovered when I walked down to the water. The property management people had left a welcome note on the kitchen counter, per Margaret's standing instructions, with firewood stacked, the system tested, the pantry stocked with basics. She had planned this too. She had imagined me arriving here. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the lake for a long time. This was home. Not Elmwood, not the Hampton Inn, not the transitional apartment in Burlington I'd rented while the probate closed. This was what Margaret had left me, not just the money or the property or the legal victory. This specific view. This specific quiet. I drove back to Burlington, finished the last of my things in the apartment, and moved to Muskoka before the ice went off the lake. I learned the routines slowly. The way the light came across the water in the morning. The sound the birches made in wind. The names of the family at the neighboring property, who waved from their dock and eventually invited me for coffee and didn't ask too many questions. I found a doctor in Bracebridge, a grocery store, a library where I spent Tuesday afternoons reading things Margaret would have recommended. I was 64 years old, and I was, in every way that mattered, starting over. On a Sunday in June, I finally responded to Daniel's email. I wrote it by hand first on a legal pad, the way I used to draft complicated client letters, then typed it out. Daniel, I received your email. I've thought about it for some time before responding. I believe you're telling the truth about understanding what you did. Whether that understanding changes anything is a longer question. Your mother spent years seeing what I was slow to see. I was slower because I didn't want to see it. She protected me from the consequences of my own willingness to make excuses for you. I won't do that anymore. I'm not closing the door permanently, but I need you to understand that trust, if it returns at all, will take years, not months. And it will require consistent evidence, not words. If you want to begin that process, it begins with time. Not a conversation, not a meeting. Time and proof. I'm living at the Muskoka property now. I won't give you the address. When enough time has passed, I'll consider whether I want to share it. That's all I have for you right now. Thomas. I sent it and made coffee and sat on the dock, watching a pair of loons work their way across the far side of the bay. Nicole sent a message 2 weeks later. Short, careful, no demands. Just an acknowledgement that she had made choices that were cruel, and that she was sorry. I did not respond. Not yet. There were days when the lake was so still in the morning that the birches reflected perfectly in the water, like the whole property was suspended between two worlds. I drank my coffee on the dock on those mornings and thought about Margaret, about the way she had always been 2 steps ahead, in the clinic, in the house, in the garden, about how she had sat down 18 months before she died and planned all of this carefully, a woman who loved her son enough to grieve for who he was becoming, and loved her husband enough to protect him from it. My 64th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I spent it alone, which was the correct way to spend it, at least this year. Made a proper dinner, opened a bottle of Niagara Riesling that the neighbor had brought over as a housewarming gift, sat on the dock, and watched the sun go down behind the pines across the water. I thought about what I had lost and what I had been given. 41 years of marriage. A son who had chosen what he chose. A legal battle I had not looked for and had not enjoyed winning. A house sold. A life dismantled. A new one building itself slowly around a fireplace and a dock, and a view that my wife had picked for me years before she ever told me it existed. Was it worth it? Standing up, fighting back. Not letting myself become the old man sleeping in the doghouse while they sold 41 years of my life out from under me? I raised my glass to the water. The way you do when you're alone, and the person you want to talk to isn't there anymore. I think so, I said. I think you were right. The loons called from the far side of the bay. The water turned orange and then pink and then dark, and the first stars appeared over the pines, and I sat there until I was cold, which was later than I expected, and then I went inside and washed my glass and stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking out at the dock where my chair still faced the water. Tomorrow I'd call my brother in Guelph and make plans to have him up for the long weekend. Tomorrow the property management people were coming to repair the boathouse door. Tomorrow was another day of building something new in a place my wife had quietly prepared for me, long before I knew I would need it. I turned off the kitchen light, went to bed in the room that faced the lake, listened to the water moving against the dock, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept through the night.